There's so much bad information online about what gain staging is, and it's probably one of the most common questions people have when they're trying to record and mix their own music at home. And rightly so, amateur recordists and mixers are confused when it comes to gain staging. What is it? Why does it matter? Where does it matter? And exactly how do you properly gain stage, both when recording and mixing? Well, in this video, I want to go through all of that stuff and hopefully debunk many of these BS myths around gain staging that just don't seem to go away. Now, to preface this, gain staging was pretty important decades ago when engineers were recording to tape. The problem with tape is that it is inherently noisy. It's got a lot of hiss and it's got a high noise floor, much higher than digital recording. Now, this caused a problem if engineers recorded at too low a level, too quiet, because the signal was too close to the noise floor and there was noise in the recording. Now, the solution to this problem was to record as hot as possible without clipping. That ensured that the signal wasn't clipping, but it was also significantly above that noise floor, so you didn't hear or notice the noise in the recording. That's gain staging the recording. Nowadays, though, this isn't nearly as much of a problem, because if you're recording with good quality equipment and modern converters, the noise floor is insanely low. You're just not going to notice it. Unless you're trying to record a pin drop from 10 feet away, you'll be fine. Just make sure that you're not clipping the converters and you're good to go. Now, once you've recorded your tracks, if something is too loud or too quiet, that is literally what your faders are for in your DAW and what mixing aims to achieve, a good balance between all of your recorded tracks. So grab the faders, push things up, push things down, and just place everything where they need to be for it to sound balanced. Now, the exception to all of this is if you're using any classic analog equipment while you're recording, you're probably going to want to think about gain staging a little bit further than simply not clipping your converters. Now, a great example of this for me is when I'm recording vocals or acoustic guitar. My main preamp is the one that I've got in the rack at the side of me. It's a Neve 1073 DPD. Neves have some gorgeous distortion and saturation characteristics, particularly in the mid-range, and the more you drive the preamp, the thicker that lower mid-range seems to get. Now, if I'm recording a super clean pop vocal, I might not want too much of that saturation, so I'm going to set the gain on my Neve preamp quite low so that we're not getting too much of that. And then if I need more gain, if I need it to be louder in my DAW, I can just add some clean gain further down the signal. I'll just clip gain it up in my DAW. Now, on the other hand, if I'm recording some super heavy rock vocals and I want them to sound thick and full and I want to use that saturation, I'm going to gain the Neve up. I'm going to drive the gain on the preamp harder and then just trim the level down before it hits the converters and just make sure that we're not clipping anything. When it comes to recording acoustic guitar, I'm a big fan of Neves for acoustic guitar because they just fill out that lower mid-range and make the guitar sound really, really big. So I'm going to have the gain set pretty high and again, just trim the level down before it hits the converters just to make sure that we're not clipping anything. All of these are examples of gain staging. Essentially, you just want to make sure that you're not clipping the converters before the signal hits your DAW, but you can drive analog circuits more or less to get more colour and tone out of them. This is a creative decision that you make, but it's all an example of gain staging. Now, when it comes to mixing and gain staging, there is a crazy amount of misinformation online, and by far the one that bugs me the most is that your mix must be rendered at -6 dB before sending it off to mastering to give the mastering engineer headroom to work. Where this idea of -6 came from in the first place, I don't know. It's literally just a random number plucked out of thin air. And if any mastering engineer tells you that you must be submitting your mixes to them at -6, then fire them. Don't use them. They literally have no clue what they're talking about. Your only concern when rendering your mix is that it is not clipping. It's not going above digital 0. And that's it. It doesn't matter if it peaks at -0.1 or -6. It literally makes no difference. And I'm going to show you now how easy this is for mastering engineers. So on the screen in front of me, I have two mixers. And as you can see, they're both rendered at different levels, but neither of them are clipping. This is fine. The top one's peaking at around -3, and this one's somewhere around -0.5, but neither of them are going above digital 0. That's fine. If a mastering engineer wants this top one to be a little bit louder and just to be hitting their plugins and their analog equipment at a hotter level, they can literally just gain it up. There, job done. It's now louder. If this one is too hot and they need a lower level to be hitting their equipment, well then There we go. We've dragged it down. It is as simple as that. So don't let anyone tell you that it matters where your mix is rendered. It doesn't. Just make sure that it is not clipping. Now, when it comes to gain staging in plugins, this is where it can get a little bit complicated. As a rule, if you're using a digital plugin like the digital stock EQs that come in Cubase, Pro Tools, Logic, the digital stock compressors, then it really doesn't matter. There is very little to worry about when it comes to gain staging those plugins. Digital is very linear, so it's going to make little to no discernible difference whether you're hitting those plugins hot or at a lower level. Just do whatever makes sense for the mix and don't worry too much about it. However, if you're using plugins that model analog equipment, then it's very likely that they're going to have some non-linear characteristics modeled within them. Many analog circuits have compression, distortion, and saturation characteristics built into the circuits, just inherent within that particular design, and you hear it more when you drive into them hotter. And you can use this to your advantage, and a good example is tape. Tape is extremely non-linear. It tends to smooth out and compress the high frequencies, and it can make tracks just sound really silky and really smooth. Another example is an SSL 4K console. The center section, the mix bus, has a really gorgeous saturation to the mid-range, and again, you hear that more as you drive into it harder. And this can be good or bad, and it really depends on what you're trying to achieve in the mix. Let me show you some examples. So I've got a mix open here. This is a pop punk, pop rock mix, and let me show you some different examples of tape that I've got going on. Now, the first place I'm using tape is across the whole mix. So if I go onto my mix bus, we've got a tape as the second to last plugin in the chain, but I'm also using tape on guitars, and I'm also using them in drums as well, particularly on the snare drum. Let's just take a look at the tape on the snare. So this is the snare top mic, and as you can see, we've got a tape plugin as the first thing, and then we've got some EQ compression just after it. Now I'm using tape here because I want it to sound like the drums were recorded to tape. Tape just sounds great, particularly on drums for rock music. Now if I solo this snare, you can just see how hard we're hitting the tape machine. We're hitting it quite hard. You might have even noticed the red light went on there. I'm not worried about that because it sounds great. It sounds exactly how I want it to. I'm not going to freak out that the red lights are lighting up if it sounds good. You mix with your ears, not with your eyes. Now, another example of tape is on the mix bus across the whole mix. Now, this can start to sound really gritty and fall apart if we get too much of that tape sound. And as you can see, I've pulled way back on the input because the whole mix is going into this, and I want to make sure that we're getting just the right amount of that tape effect. So let's take a listen, and then what I'll do is I'll drive this input hotter, and you can see how that changes the sound and the tone of what we're hearing. So as we drove this tape machine harder, you really started to notice it on the drums. The snare just got squashed and all the life went out of it. The guitars started to get a little bit more gritty in a way that I just didn't like. So we're gain staging this plugin exactly where we want it. Because it is a non-linear analog model plugin, we need to make sure that we're hitting it at the right level to get the sound that we want, and tape has a sound. Another example of this is again on the mix bus, and this plugin here. This is the VCC, it's the mix bus plugin from Slate Digital, and this models the center section of a SSL 4K console. SSLs have a gorgeous saturation to the mid-range, but you only really notice that when you drive the signal at hotter levels into it. So we're hitting this at a place that just sounds pleasing. If we go too far, it starts to break up and distort and it doesn't sound good. If we don't hit it hard enough, we don't get that effect. We don't get that saturation. Again, let's take a listen, and I'll push this hotter and colder, and you can hear how it changes the sound. So again, you can hear how that sound changes. When we push harder into it, it starts to break up and distort too much in a way that just doesn't sound good. So we're making sure that we're hitting this plugin at the perfect level. We're not worried that it's going into the red. We're not even worried if that red light comes on, because we're listening and we're using our ears, and we're getting just the right amount of saturation from that plugin. This is all gain staging. Now, if you're releasing music, maybe you're a producer, you're an artist in a band, songwriter, I've got something that you're definitely going to want to check out. It's very likely that if you're writing songs that you don't lack ideas. In fact, probably quite the opposite. You've got a million song ideas scattered all throughout your brain, and probably the voice notes app on your phone. The problem here is that this is a guaranteed way to forget, or even worse, lose one of your greatest song ideas yet. Every time you hum another song idea into the voice notes app of your phone, it gets pushed further and further down, potentially getting forgot about. Or even worse, you get a new phone, everything gets wiped, and you lose everything forever. How many amazing songs must have got forgotten about or lost because of this? Well, I've created a solution to this problem, and it's called the Songwriters Project Organiser. So using this app, you can keep track of every single song idea at every stage. If it is just an idea in your head, you can put it at one stage. And as that progresses from an idea to a demo, to a recording, to a mix, to master, to release, you can track it all within this app. If you lose your phone, you get a new one, everything gets wiped, not a problem. Download the app, log in, everything is exactly where you left it. You can also use it on any device, tablets, and also laptops. And best of all, and probably my most favorite feature, is that it's collaborative. You can choose to share this with anybody that you want. So if you're collaborating with another artist, if you're working with a producer, a mix or a mastering engineer, then you can share it with that person, and you can both edit it and keep track of every single song at wherever it is in that project. And best of all, it's completely free to use. So there's a link in the description below. Go ahead and check it out. You've literally got nothing to lose, but potentially a lot to gain, because you will never forget or lose a great song idea again.